Spring had arrived on the campus of Greenfield University, and with it came the subtle hum of excitement that only the end of a semester could bring. Students wandered between the lush green, tree lined pathways, laughing in clusters, their heads bent over smartphones, unaware of the world beyond the campus. Vine, however, felt like she was in a bubble, separated from all of it. Her thoughts were elsewhere, always orbiting around one person, Jenko, the senior who had unknowingly stolen her heart months ago. Jungkook was the kind of student everyone noticed. Tall, with a lean athletic build, dark hair that always seemed to fall perfectly over his forehead, and eyes that carried a mix of mischief and warmth. He commanded attention without trying. Wine had watched him from afar for almost a year. His effortless charm, the way he laughed with his friends, and how he treated everyone with a casual friendliness that made him seem approachable yet untouchable at the same time. She had never spoken to him beyond a few casual greetings, but that had been enough for her imagination to fill in the rest. Spring had a rhythm all its own at Greenfield. The air carried the scent of blooming flowers mixed with the faint tang of old textbooks. Students lounged on the grass, strumming guitars or arguing over the latest assignment. For Vine, these sights had always felt comforting until today, because today Jungkook had done something that Vine had been both dreading and secretly hoping he wouldn't. It was a sunny Wednesday afternoon, and the campus courtyard was bustling with energy. Vine had been sitting under the old oak tree near the library, books open but largely ignored, her mind replaying her internal monologues from the last few weeks. She had been convincing that she could just move on, that she could admire Jungkook from a distance quietly without letting it affect her, but her resolve had been weakening slowly and painfully with every glance she stole at him when he was around. The courtyard had been unusually crowded that day. Clubs were setting up booths for the spring festival, and the air was filled with chatter, laughter, and the occasional clatter of folding chairs. Vine had been lost in her notebook trying to outline an essay for psychology class when a sudden commotion caught her attention. Jungkook was standing near the fountain, at the center of the courtyard, surrounded by his usual group of friends. The way he moved, even casually, drew eyes, girls whispering, boys nudging each other, all seemingly caught in the orbit of his presence. Vine heart sunk as he watched him. There was a glow in his expression, one she had never seen directed at anyone before. Her chest tightened, an almost physical ache, as she followed the direction of his gaze, and then she saw her, a girl laughing brightly, her hair catching the sunlight, standing right next to Jenko. Her hand rested on his arm, comfortably familiar, as if this closeness had been rehearsed 1,000 times. The smile on Jungkook's face was warm, genuine, and aimed entirely at her. Vine blinked. "Hey everyone!" Jungkook's voice rang out across the courtyard, clear, confident, and somehow even more unbearable now. "I have an announcement to make." The crowd hushed slightly. Vine's grip on her pen tightened, the words of her essay fading into oblivion. "I have a girlfriend now," he continued, eyes not leaving the girl beside him, "and I'm really happy." The courtyard erupted in cheers and laughter. Vine's stomach turned. It felt as though someone had punched her from the inside. Her mind, which had been racing with fantasies and what ifs, slammed into the wall of reality. Jungkook had a girlfriend, and it wasn't her. Vine closed her notebook slowly, the sound of the pages snapping echoing in her ears. She stood up, forcing herself to look away. Even through every fibre of her being wanted to watch him, wanted to scream, wanted to confront the cruel twist of fate. Her legs moved mechanically, taking her away from the courtyard, away from Jungkook, away from the suffocating ache in her chest. She found herself wandering down an empty hallway, past classrooms with their doors open and professors lecturing to half-asleep students. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, and the hum of the air conditioning seemed unusually loud in the silence she had created for herself. Vine's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: hurt, anger, disbelief, but above all, a deep simmering need to protect herself. For months she had nurtured a quiet affection for Jungkook, convincing herself that admiration from far was harmless, but now confronted with the undeniable truth, she realized how vulnerable she had allowed herself to be. She had invested feelings in someone who would never reciprocate them, and the only way to survive, she decided, was to retreat, to build walls around her heart, to ignore the one person who had unintentionally become the center of her universe. The next day wine were her first move. She avoided the places she knew Jungkook would be. The library full of students, but she chose a corner far from his usual spot. The cafe near the student center she went only when she knew he was in class. When she did pass him on the hallway, she didn't look up, she didn't wave, she didn't give the faintest hint that she had ever noticed him. Inside, though, every encounter left her stomach twisting, every laugh he shared with someone else stabbing like a knife. Her friends noticed the change immediately. "Vine, are you okay?" asked Hannah, her roommate and closest friend, during breakfast the next morning. Her brow was furrowed in concern. "You have been avoiding everyone lately, and you barely touched your toast." Vine forced a smile, bitter and practiced. "I'm fine, just tired, I guess." Hannah wasn't convinced, but she let it slide. Vine didn't want to talk about it, not yet. Not when the wound was still raw. Instead, she buried herself in the assignments, in late night study sections, and the comforting rhythm of routine. Every time her phone buzzed with a notification, her heart skipped, hoping it wasn't Jungkook's name on the screen. And every time it wasn't, she felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Weeks passed, and Vine's resolve to ignore him strengthened. She had to convince herself that he was no longer an option, that his happiness didn't need to intersect with hers. And yet, life had a way of throwing obstacles when least expected. One evening, she found herself in the library, a quiet sanctuary where she could lose herself in the pages of the textbook. She had just settled into a secluded corner when the unmistakable sound of Jungkook's laughter reached her ears. Her stomach clenched involuntarily. He was walking with the girl from the courtyard, books in hand, speaking to her in that familiar, effortless way that made everything seem effortless. Vine's first instinct was to retreat, but something, maybe curiosity, maybe the remnants of longing, kept her rooted in place. She watched them from shadows, forcing herself to focus on the words of her textbook, but the sound of his voice, the way he smiled, and the easy intimacy between them were impossible to ignore. Every laugh she shared with her felt like a reminder of what she could not have. Not yet. She didn't move, didn't cry, didn't confront the pain directly. She had made a decision, and she was determined to stick to it, even if it hurt. By the end of the evening, Vine had returned to her dorm room, exhausted not from studying but from the emotional battle she had fought silently all day. She sank onto her bed, hugging her knees to her chest, staring at her ceiling. Jungkook's announcement had changed everything, but she was slowly learning something important. Ignoring him didn't mean she didn't care. It meant she was protecting herself, reclaiming control over her own heart, and choosing her own path forward. It wouldn't be easy. The corridors of Greenfield University were filled with Jungkook, his presence unavoidable, his charm intoxicating. But Vine had decided that only way to survive was to create distance, and in that distance she would find strength she didn't know she had. She didn't know when or if her feelings would fade entirely, but for now she had made a promise to herself she would ignore him, not out of malice, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. And in that quiet moments alone in her room, Vine felt a small defiant spark of something she hadn't felt in weeks: control over her own heart. Tomorrow the campus would still be bustling, Jungkook would still smile, still laugh, still be everything she had admired from afar, and would still ignore because some lessons, painful as they were, needed to be learned alone. The morning sun spilled over Greenfield University campus like liquid gold, illuminating the familiar pathways, benches, and classrooms. To most students, it was just another ordinary day of lectures, assignments, and fleeting conversations. But to Vine, it was another text of endurance, another day of pretending she was unaffected, of keeping her emotions buried deep beneath the surface. Since Jungkook's announcement weeks ago, he had protected the art of avoidance. She knew the exact times he attended his classes, the spot he liked to linger in between lectures, and the cafe where he grabbed coffee with his friends. She had adjusted her own schedule meticulously, making sure she never crossed paths unnecessarily, and yet, despite her cheerful planning, fate or perhaps coincidence had a cruel way of reminding her of what she was trying to forget. It started that Monday morning in the library. Wine had arrived early, intent on finishing a long overdue research paper, and had claimed her usual corner by tall windows that overlooked the campus lawn. The sunlight bathed her notes in warmth, and for a moment she allowed herself to sink in the comforting rhythm of her pen scratching against the paper. Then she heard it, a familiar voice, smooth and casual, speaking just behind her. Wine? Her heart leaped violently in her chest. She froze mid-sentence, gripping her pen so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Slowly she turned her head, pretending to look down at her notebook. Jungkook stood there, holding a stack of books, his eyes searching for hers. He didn't smile immediately, not yet, but there was something in his gaze, mixture of curiosity and surprise. Vine's thought tightened. She forced herself to look away, focusing on the lines of paper on her paper. "Oh, hi," he said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He raised an eyebrow, tilting his head slightly. "I have been trying to find you for the past few days. I noticed you have been avoiding me." Her stomach sank. How could he notice? How could he see through the walls she worked so hard to build? She didn't answer immediately, keeping her eyes glued to her notes. "I have just been busy," she murmured, hoping the excuse sounded plausible. But Jungkook wasn't easily convinced. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without asking, a bold move that made Vine stiffen. "Vine?" he asked, his tone calm but insistent. "You can't just disappear like that. Did I do something?" She swallowed, forcing herself to remain composed. The words she had rehearsed so many times in her head, angry, witty, cutting remarks, suddenly felt insufficient. "No," she said finally, flatly. "You didn't do anything. I just have other things to focus on." Jungkook's lips pressed into a thin line, a faint frown forming. "Other things like ignoring me?" Vine flinched internally at the accusation but kept her exterior steady. "Maybe," she said softly, "maybe it's just easier that way." Easier, that word tasted bitter on her tongue. It wasn't about ease, it was about survival. Every glance at him, every accidental brush in the hallway threatened to unravel the fragile composure she had painstakingly maintained. She couldn't allow herself to be amused again by feelings she knew were one-sided. Jungkook leaned back in his chair, eyes studying her carefully. For a moment, the usual confident, carefree demeanor seemed to waver. "Wine?" he said slowly. "If this is about her," he gestured vaguely toward the cafe windows beyond the library, where she knew his girlfriend often sat. "I didn't mean for you to feel." "Don't," Wine interrupted sharply, surprising even herself. The word hung in the air, cutting through the quiet hum of the library. "Don't try to explain. It's fine, really." Jungkook's frown deepened. "You are lying to yourself and to me." Vine's hand froze on her pen. He was right, of course. She wasn't fine, she wasn't okay. But admitting that truth aloud was something she couldn't do, not yet. Not to him. Instead, she stood abruptly, gathering her papers and backpack. I have class, she said, voice clip, and walked away before he could respond. As she moved through the hallways, she felt a familiar pang of frustration both at Jungkook and at herself. Why did he have to notice her avoidance? Why did her heart still betray her even as her mind screamed to stay away? The rest of the day passed in a haze. Wine attended lectures, scribbled down notices mechanically, and barely registered the conversations around her. When she finally returned to her dorm room, she collapsed onto her bed, hugging her knees and letting out a shaky breath. Her phone vibrated on the desk, but she ignored it, unwilling to see the name that might appear on the screen. For the first time in weeks, the loneliness felt heavy, not the safe solitude she had embraced, but a hollow ache that reminded her how much she had once cared. It was during evening study section that she realized just how complicated her college life would be when emotions were involved. Her friend Hannah burst into the room, a mix of excitement and mischief on her face. Why? You won't believe what just happened. Vine lifted her head from the textbook, foreigning interest. What? Hannah plopped down beside her, lowering her voice dramatically. Jungkook, he noticed you today. And not just noticed, he asked about you, like directly. People were talking was he was looking for you in the library. You saw that, right? Vine's chest tightened. I don't want to talk about it, she said, voice barely audible. Hannah frowned, giving her a pointed look. You can't just pretend he doesn't exist forever. You have been avoiding him like, I don't know, a ninja in the shadows, but he notices. He always notices. Vine closed her eyes, letting Hannah's words sink in. She knew they were true. Jungkook had always had that effect on people he was impossible to ignore. And the cruel irony was that she wasn't sure she wanted to ignore him, even as she told herself she had to. The next few weeks became a delicate balancing act. Vine mastered the art of subtle avoidance by passing Jungkook in the hallways without making eye contact, taking alternate routes to class, and pretending indifference wherever he smiled in her direction. And yet, despite all her efforts, moments of accidental proximity sent her heart into chaos. One afternoon, she was walking in her psychology lecture when she saw him again, standing outside the classroom with a couple of friends laughing in that way. Her stomach twisted. She forced her eyes to the ground, keeping her praise, and slipped inside just as the professor called the class to order. Her seat at the back of the lecture hall became her fortress. From there she could observe without being observed, listen without engaging, and keep the distance she desperately needed. But even the sanctuary couldn't shield her entirely. Every time Jungkook entered the room, every time his voice carried across the hall, she felt a tug at her chest, a reminder that no wall was strong enough to completely shut out her emotions. And then came the day of the Spring Festival. The campus was alive with color, laughter, and music. Booths lined with quadrangle, students mingled, and the air buzzed with excitement. Vine had told herself she would avoid the festival entirely, but her friends had insisted she come. It's not about him, Hannah, she had said. It's about you having fun. Just don't let him ruin it for you. Vine nodded, though inwardly she knew it would be impossible. The festival was Jungkook's element. He thrived in these moments, effortlessly charming everyone around him, drawing attention without even trying. And yet she decided to go. She needed to prove something to herself, that she could exist in the same space as him without collapsing into the old feeling she had been trying to bury. From the moment she stepped onto the festival ground, she was on high alert. She noticed the familiar group of friends he often surrounded himself with, the way he laughed, the easy camaraderie he shared with everyone, and then inevitably she saw him, Django, standing at the edge of the fountain, arm crossed around his girlfriend, smiling in a way that made her chest, stomach, and twist. Her instinct was to turn and leave, to retreat into the safety of distance. But something held her there. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was a lingering hope that she could endure this without breaking. She wandered through the festival, pretending to enjoy the games, the food, the music, all while keeping a one careful eye on him. Throughout the afternoon, Jungkook seemed to notice her presence enough he made no direct effort to approach her. Occasionally their eyes met across the crowd, and Vine felt the old familiar flutter in the same mix of longing, irritation, and something unspoken. She hated that she still cared. She hated that ignoring him didn't make the feelings disappear. By the time evening fell and the festival lights twinkled like the stars across the campus lawn, Vine realized something important. Ignoring Jungkook wasn't about pretending he didn't exist, it was about protecting herself. But no matter how hard she tried, the heart didn't obey logic. Walls could be built, distance could be maintained, the appearance could be preserved, but the pull he had on her was undeniable. As she walked back to her dorm that night, the distant laughter and music fading behind her, she made a silent promise she would continue to ignore him, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. And perhaps someday the choice would be enough to heal the ache that lingered in her chest. Until then, every glance, every accidental encounter, every moment of his presence would be a test of her resolve, and she had no intention of failing. The campus had taken a quieter tone as midterms approached. The vibrant energy of spring had dulled slightly under the weight of essays, presentations, and late night study sessions. Yet for Vine, the chaos of the world outside felt distant compared to the storm inside her. Every interaction, every glance, and every whisper laugh she overheard carried the ghost of Jungkook's presence. Ignoring him had become both a shield and constant reminder of the one thing she could not have. She had grown adept to evasion over the past few weeks. She no longer lingered in the hallways, avoided in the library, when she knew he would be there, and chose quiet corners of the cafe instead the familiar spots where he often met friends. Her friends Hannah most of all noticed the change in her, the tension that lingered beneath the surface. Vine, you can't keep doing this to yourself, Hannah said one evening as they studied together in their dorm room. You are obsessed with avoiding him. It's not healthy. Vine's eyes remained on her notes, her hands gripping the pen a little too lightly. I'm fine, she said, though the lie lasted a bit longer. I need space, Hannah frowned. Space? You're torturing yourself. He's around and you still feel everything. You can't just pretend it doesn't matter. You need to. Enough, Vine interrupted sharply. She didn't intend for it to come out that harshly, but the words tumbled from her mouth anyway. I said I need space. That's all. I don't want to talk about him. Hannah bit her lip, glancing at her friend with concern, but said nothing further. Vine returned to her notes, the silence between them heavy, suffocating and oddly comforting. The tension came to a head few days later during a group project in Jungkook's advanced psychology class. Vine had been assigned to work with him, a cruel twist of fate she had tried to avoid by selecting other options during the registration period. Now she was trapped in a room with him, forced to cooperate, to exchange words, to exist in the same place. Jungkook entered the classroom with his usual confident stride, his presence filling the room instantly. He greeted the group casually, his gaze settling on Vine for just a fraction longer than necessary. Her stomach twisted, her resolve tested the moment her eyes met. She looked down at her notebook, forcing herself to appear absorbed in her work. Vine, Jungkook said quietly, leaning over to look at her notes. Are you okay? She stiffened. Yes, she replied curtly. I'm fine. The truth was far more complicated. She was not fine. Every word, every look, every unspoken emotion clawed at her from within. She had been avoiding him, yet now forced proximity made the effort almost unbearable. The project dragged on, filled with awkward silences and tension so thick it seemed tangible. Jungkook occasionally tried to break through, offering a small joke or a light comment, but Vine remained distant, guarded, her voice fortified against any emotional breach, yet even in her silence he noticed. By the third day, frustration began to bubble over. Jungkook had tried subtly, but her avoidance was complete and he couldn't ignore it any longer. During a particularly long section in the library, he leaned forward, his voice low and insistent. Vine, stop pretending. I can see it in your eyes. You are not just being distant for no reason. Her hands froze, gripping her pen so tightly that it snapped under her pressure. She looked up, eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and hurt. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. You don't get it. You have moved on, and I'm not supposed to care anymore. Jungkook's expression softened, a flicker of pain crossing his feature. Vine, I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know. The words pierced through her carefully constructed armor. She had ignored him to protect herself, yet hearing him say this, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes, made her defenses tremble. On a brief, terrifying moment, she felt all the old feelings surge back, the admiration, the longing, the quiet of her chest. I have to, I can't, she said, standing abruptly, her chair scraped against the floor, echoing in the quiet library. I need to go. Jungkook rose too, his hand almost reaching out to her, but she stepped back instinctively. Wine. She didn't stop, she didn't turn back, she moved through the hallways, her heart hammering, her breath uneven, each step to her farther to him. Yet every part of her wished she could run to him instead. Over the next few days, Vine realized that ignoring Jungkook was no longer sustainable. Each encounter, each accidental brush of his presence left her more unsettled than before. The walls she had built to protect herself were cracking under the weight of unresolved feelings. It wasn't just longing anymore, it was anger, frustration, jealousy, and confusion all wrapped together. He hated that he had a girlfriend, yes, but she also hated that she still cared despite everything. The internal conflict gnawed at her relentlessly, making her feel both vulnerable and alive in ways she hadn't anticipated. One evening, she found herself sitting alone in the campus garden, watching the sun dip beyond the horizon. The sky was a riot of colors, orange, pink, and purple, blending together like a painting. She felt a presence beside her and turned slowly. Django stood there, his expression unreadable, but his gaze fixed entirely on her. Vine, she said softly, we need to talk. Her chest tightened and she took her head. There is nothing to talk about, she whispered. Yes, there is. He insisted, stepping closer. Have been trying to give you space, but you can't keep pretending. I can see how you feel, and I want to know. I didn't mean for this to happen. The vulnerability in his voice was unexpected. Vine's reserve wavered. She had ignored him for weeks, built walls around her heart, convinced herself that detachment was the answer. But hearing him speak like this, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, made her defenses crumble. I can't, she said, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. You have her. I'm supposed to ignore you. Jungkook's expression softened further. He took a careful step closer, not invading her space, but bridging distance that had felt insurmountable for so long. I know, she said gently, and I respect that, but I don't want to leave things unsaid. You are important to me, Vine, and I don't want to lose you completely. For the first time in weeks, Jungkook allowed Vine herself to breathe. The anger, the hurt, the longing, they all mingled together, raw and unfiltered. She realized that ignoring him had protected her, yes, but it also had left her suspended in a state of constant tension, facing him even just to hear his words brought clarity. I don't know what to do, she admitted, her voice trembling. I can't just forget how I feel. Jungkook nodded, a small understanding smile forming. You don't have to. I'm not asking you to. I want to be honest with you about everything. The sun had complete set, leaving the garden bathed in soft closed lamps and the twinkling lights strung above. Vine felt the weight of her emotion shift, still heavy, still complicated, but somehow lighter than before. The walls weren't gone entirely, but a crack had opened, a crack that allowed for understanding, for dialogue, for the possibility of healing, whether that meant moving on or finding a new path together. For the first time in weeks, Vine allowed herself to meet his gaze completely, not with longing, not with anger, but with a recognition of emotion they had both tried to avoid, the connection that still lingered, but the uncertain path that lay ahead. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers, and Vine felt a fragile sense of peace. Ignoring Jungkook had been her armor, but acknowledging her feelings, even in this complicated, painful way, was the first step toward reclaiming herself. The semester had begun its slow, relentless march toward exams, but for Vine the days carried an unfamiliar energy, a mix of anxiety, curiosity, and that strange flutter she hadn't allowed herself to feel in weeks. Jungkook had been different lately. Gone was a casual aloofness that made her walls feel so necessary. In its place, it was a new intensity, a subtle attention that unnerved her, made her heart race, and yet drew her in unwillingly. It started small, longer glances across the classroom, brushes of his hands when passing notes for projects, playful smirks during group work. Vine, determined to maintain her composure, tried to ignore it. She told herself that his behavior meant nothing, that she couldn't allow herself to fall into old patterns. But the truth was unavoidable. Jungkook was changing, and so far that was her reaction to him. One late afternoon, Vine sat under the sprawling oak tree near the library, trying to read for her literature class. She felt his presence before she saw him. Look, you look miserable, Jungkook said casually, dropping onto the grass beside her without asking. His dark hair fell under his eyes and he grinned, leaning back on his hands, Vine blinked on off her. I'm fine, she said quietly, keeping her gaze onto the textbook, her voice steady but her heart betrayed her with every word. He said, tilting his head, a teasing spark in his eyes. That's why you're glaring at the poetry book like it insulted your family? Vine rolled her eyes, though a faint smile returned to escape. It's just boring, she muttered, trying to sound convincing. Sure, Jungkook said, clearly unconvinced. She leaned closer slightly, lowering his voice in a conspirational tone. You know you have been distant, but I think I like this new Vine. She is mysterious, hard to read. I like a challenge. Her stomach flipped. I'm not a challenge, she said, trying to mask the sudden rush of warmth that his words ignited. Are you sure? He teased, propping himself up one on elbow. Because I feel like there is tension between us, like something unsaid waiting for the right moment. Vine froze, her pen trembling slightly in her hand. She wanted to protest, to claim she was imagining it, but there was an undeniable truth in his gaze, something playful, something intimate, something that hinted at intention she hadn't dared to consider. For the next few days, Jungkook's behavior became more overt. Small touches on her shoulder, lingering looks, and deliberately timed comments during her group projects. Vine felt herself unraveling, caught in the push and pull of emotion she had worked so hard to control. And yet, even as her heart fluttered, a part of her remained cautious. She couldn't forget the girlfriend announcement, the weeks of hurt, the distance she had vowed to maintain. It all came to head one evening when he cornered her in the empty courtyard after a late library section. The sky was painted in shades of violet and gold, the campus quiet except for the distant hum of the lights and rustle of leaves. Wine, Jungkook said, stepping closer, his expression serious now, leaving the teasing smirk behind. I need to tell you something. She crossed her arms, instinctively putting up her walls. What is that? she asked, though her voice betrayed a hint of curiosity. He took a deep breath, eyes locked on hers. Everything I did about that girlfriend, which was a prank. Her eyes widened. A prank? He nodded slowly. Yeah, I wanted to see how you would react. I wanted to see if maybe you felt the same way about me as I felt about. Mine's mind went black, her stomach twisted, anchored to sleep. Relief and something dangerously close to hope all collided beside her. You what? I know it sounds crazy, he said, running a hand through his hair, but it was never real. I didn't have a girlfriend. I just wanted to make you jealous. Wanted you to maybe confess how you felt. For a long moment, Vine stared at him, heart hammering. Part of her wanted to laugh at the absurdity, part wanted to scream, and part wanted to throw herself into his arms. The truth was almost too much to process.